Nothing about that Saturday felt like a Saturday that would change everything. That is the thing I keep turning over, even now. It was ordinary in every way that matters. The light through my kitchen window, the smell of coffee going, the sound of the neighbor's dog carrying across the yard. Completely, entirely ordinary, right up until it wasn't. My name is Gerald Whitmore, 67 years old, 34 years as a licensed pharmacist, the last 22 of them as the owner of Whitmore Pharmacy on Clement Street in San Francisco's Richmond district. I know medications, the way a carpenter knows wood by grain, by weight, by the specific way each one behaves under pressure. I know what pills look like. I know what they smell like. I know their colors, their coatings, their markings, their precise therapeutic windows, and the exact point at which each one stops being medicine and starts being something else entirely. I say all of that not to impress you. I say it because it matters to everything that follows. I live alone now in the house on 22nd Avenue that my wife Carol and I bought in 1991, back when the Richmond was still the kind of neighborhood where you could actually afford to buy something. She passed 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 14 months. From diagnosis to the end. I stayed in the house because leaving felt like agreeing to something I wasn't ready to agree to. The hydrangeas she planted along the front fence still come back every May. That's enough reason for me. My daughter Claire is 39. She lives across the bay in Walnut Creek with her husband David and their 2 kids. We talk on the phone most Sundays. We have dinner when schedules allow. We are not the kind of family that announces its love loudly. We are the kind that shows up. Or so I believed. My son Marcus is 36. He lives in Austin, Texas. Works in software. Calls when he remembers to, which is not as often as either of us would like. But he has a good heart, and I have never doubted that. I want you to hold on to that picture. A quiet widower in a San Francisco house. A daughter across the bay. A son in Texas. A pharmacist who knows his medications better than he knows most people. Hold on to it, because the story I am about to tell you begins exactly there. It was the second Saturday of January. Claire had come over to help me go through some of Carol's things, boxes in the spare bedroom that I'd been avoiding for 6 years and had finally decided I was ready to face. She brought lunch from the Thai place on Geary that I like. We worked through the afternoon. It was quiet and a little sad, and exactly right. The kind of afternoon that earns its own silence. Around 4 o'clock, she asked if she could use the upstairs bathroom, and I said of course. I was downstairs making tea. She was up there maybe 5 minutes. When she came down, she seemed perfectly normal. We finished lunch, finished the boxes, and she hugged me at the door and told me she loved me and drove back across the bay. I did not think anything about those 5 minutes. I would. 3 days later, on a Tuesday, I opened my prescription bottle of metoprolol, the beta blocker I have been taking for mild hypertension since 2019, and I noticed something. Not wrong, exactly. Not at first. Just slightly off, the way a pharmacist notices things that other people walk right past. The tablets were the correct color, the correct size, the correct shape, but the coating had a slightly different sheen to it than I expected. Matte instead of the faint gloss I was used to. I held one up to the kitchen light. I told myself I was being paranoid. I put the tablet back in the bottle, closed the cap, and took my morning walk down to the park the way I always do. But the pharmacist in me did not let it go. The pharmacist in me kept turning it over the way you turn over a discrepancy in an inventory count, quietly, persistently, unwilling to accept that the numbers just happened to be wrong. I went back to that bottle 3 times over the next 2 days. Each time I told myself the same thing. Paranoid old man. You've been on this medication for 5 years. You know what it looks like. Stop inventing problems. On the 4th day, I called my former colleague, Jim Berardi. We worked together for 11 years at Whitmore Pharmacy before he took a position at UCSF Medical Center. One of the sharpest pharmaceutical minds I've ever known, and a man who does not waste words. Jim, I said, I need a favor, and I need you not to ask me why yet. He said, Gerald, you've been saying that to me since 1994. Go ahead. I described what I was seeing. The sheen difference. The slight variance in the way the tablet surface caught light. He asked me 3 questions about the markings. The weight. The edge profile. Then he went quiet for a moment. Bring them in, he said. Both the current bottle and anything you have from the previous refill to compare. I drove to UCSF that afternoon. Jim ran a comparison in his lab. He called me at 7:30 that evening. I was sitting in Carol's chair by the front window, watching the fog roll in off the ocean the way it does in January, thick and gray and without apology. "Gerald," he said. His voice had that quality I recognized, the quality of a man who has found the thing he was hoping he wouldn't find. "The tablets in your current bottle are not metoprolol." I sat very still. "They are a low-dose sedative compound," he said. "Pharmaceutical grade, correctly sized, and colored to approximate your prescription. Someone went to some effort here. This was not a manufacturing error." The fog outside the window pressed against the glass. "Are you hearing me?" Jim asked. "I am hearing you," I said. "How long have you been taking from this bottle?" I counted backward. 17 days, I said. He exhaled. Sedative threshold at this dosage over 17 days would produce fatigue, mild confusion, slowed response time. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that screams medical emergency. But observed over a period of weeks by someone who was watching for it, he paused. It would present as early cognitive decline. I put the phone down on the arm of the chair and looked at my hands for a long time. Early cognitive decline. I am a pharmacist. I spent 34 years counseling patients on their medications, on interactions, on what to watch for and why. I have explained cognitive decline to 100 families sitting across from me at the consultation window, gently and carefully, the way you explain something that is going to change everything. I knew exactly what it looked like from the outside, and I knew exactly what it would mean if someone were documenting it. I sat in Carol's chair until 10 o'clock that night. The fog had swallowed the streetlights. The house was very quiet. I went back through the past 3 weeks in my mind with the specific, methodical attention of a man who has spent his career reading labels. The afternoon I couldn't remember where I'd set my reading glasses, which Claire had mentioned to David on a phone call I'd overheard from the kitchen. The morning I'd started a sentence at dinner and lost the thread of it, which Claire had noted gently. "Dad, you've been doing that a lot lately." The grocery run, where I'd come home without the coffee I went specifically to buy, which Claire had brought up again the following Sunday. Small things. The kind of small things that accumulate into a pattern if someone is keeping a record. I sat with that thought for a very long time. Then I picked up my phone and called Marcus. I told him I needed him to listen to me all the way through. I told him it was important. He did not ask questions. He just said, "Dad, I'm listening." I talked for a long time. When I finished, the line was quiet. Not the quiet of a son who doesn't know what to say. The quiet of a son who is very carefully deciding what to say next. He spoke slowly. "Have you called Claire?" "No." "Good. Don't. Not yet." His voice had shifted into something careful and precise that I hadn't heard from him before. "Dad, I need you to hold on to those tablets. Don't touch anything else in that bottle. And I need you to think very hard about whether there is anything else, documents, mail, anything that has come in recently that seemed unusual." I thought about it. There was one thing. An envelope from a law firm in Pleasanton I'd received 6 weeks earlier, Marsh and Duval, estate and probate specialists, thanking me for my inquiry regarding estate planning options. I had not contacted any law firm in Pleasanton. I had thrown the letter in the recycling bin and assumed it was a mailing list error. Marcus was quiet when I told him that. "Dad," he said, "I'm booking a flight." He landed at SFO the next morning. I picked him up at arrivals in the Subaru. He came around the car and hugged me in the pickup lane, the way he hadn't since he was about 14 years old. One of those full-bodied embraces that a grown man produces when something has cut through everything else he's carrying. I felt it somewhere in the back of my chest. We drove back to 22nd Avenue and sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning. Marcus is not a lawyer. He is a software engineer. And what that means is that he thinks in systems. He thinks in architectures. He looks at information the way I look at a prescription, tracing each element back to its source, mapping the connections, following the logic chain to wherever it actually terminates. Over the next 48 hours, he built the picture. A contact of his in the legal field, a woman named Priya Anand, who handled civil litigation in Sacramento and owed Marcus a favor from a complicated situation 3 years prior, agreed to run a quiet inquiry. What she came back with 2 days later rearranged everything I thought I understood. Marsh and Duval in Pleasanton had indeed received an inquiry. not from me. The inquiry had come from a third party in early November, requesting preliminary information on conservatorship petitions and the documentation standards required by the California probate court for establishing cognitive incapacity in an elder. The third party was not named in what Priya was able to surface, but the billing address on the preliminary consultation was a residence in Walnut Creek. I was sitting at the kitchen table when Marcus told me that. He set his laptop down carefully and looked at me with the expression of a man who had just handed someone something very heavy and was not sure they could hold it. Walnut Creek, Claire and David's address. I said nothing for a long time. The refrigerator ran. Outside, the fog had come in again. January in San Francisco gives you that fog every night, relentless and indifferent and cold. My daughter, I said finally. My daughter contacted a conservatorship attorney. Marcus reached across the table and put his hand over mine. He didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that would make the architecture of it less clear. My daughter had hired a lawyer who specialized in stripping elderly people of their legal right to manage their own affairs. My daughter had replaced my heart medication with a sedative compound. My daughter had been documenting my behavior for weeks. The house on 22nd Avenue is worth $2.4 million in the current market. It had been paid off since 2008. That was the math someone had done on my life. Priya Anand told us that the conservatorship scheme she was describing was not uncommon. Those were her exact words. Not uncommon in the Bay Area elder market. A fully paid-off property in a high-value neighborhood, an aging parent living alone, a willing family member with financial pressure, and a patient lawyer who knew how to build a behavioral record. 1 in 60 older adults, she told us, experience some form of elder financial abuse. Most of it comes from inside the family. I wrote that number down on the notepad I keep by the kitchen phone. I do not know why I wrote it down. I think I needed to see it in my own handwriting to believe it was real. Marcus and Priya spent the next 3 days building our response. I want you to understand something about my son that I had perhaps not fully appreciated until those 3 days. He is meticulous. He is patient. He does not move until he knows exactly where each piece is going, and when he moves completely. He had taken emergency leave from his job in Austin. He had set up a workspace on my dining room table laptop, legal pads, printed documents arranged in labeled folders. He worked until midnight every night and was up again at 6. He did not ask me for anything except total surface normalcy in my contact with Claire. She called on Sunday, as usual. I answered on the second ring. We talked for 22 minutes about the grandchildren, about a show she was watching, about whether I'd eaten properly this week. I told her I'd been a little tired, she said gently. Dad, you've seemed a little off lately. I think you should talk to your doctor. I know, I said. You're probably right. I set the phone down and looked at my son across the dining room table. He gave me a single nod. Steady, he said. We're almost there. The independent medical evaluation was Marcus's first move. Priya had a contact doctor, Sandra Okafor, a geriatric neurologist at Stanford with extensive experience providing expert testimony in elder abuse cases in California. Getting an appointment took 4 days of pushing. Marcus drove me to Palo Alto on a Thursday morning, the bay glittering on our left as we crossed the San Mateo Bridge, the morning light clean and cold and honest. I was with Dr. Okafor for 3 hours and 15 minutes. When I came out, Marcus was in the waiting room with 2 cups of coffee from the cart in the lobby, sitting straight-backed and still, in the way that I now recognized as his version of barely contained worry. Dr. Okafor stepped into the doorway behind me. She looked at my son and said, in the direct way of someone who does not believe in softening things unnecessarily, your father is cognitively sharp across every assessed domain: memory, processing speed, executive function. If anyone is preparing to claim otherwise, they are preparing to claim something that is directly contradicted by the evidence I have in my hand. I watched Marcus's face absorb that. Relief. Then something harder and colder, moving in behind it. He stood, shook her hand, looked at me. Okay, he said quietly. Now we build. Over the next 10 days, Marcus and Priya constructed something I can only describe as what a pharmacist would call a controlled environment. Every variable accounted for, every outcome anticipated. Priya filed a preemptive competency declaration in San Francisco County Probate Court. Dr. Okafor's evaluation was attached, dated, certified, admissible. Any petition that came through that court now would walk directly into a wall. She submitted Jim Berardi's lab analysis, the full written report, which used the phrase pharmaceutical substitution, consistent with deliberate administration, along with the original bottle and comparison samples, to the San Francisco Police Department Elder Abuse Unit. A detective named Lawrence Shue was assigned. Unhurried. Methodical. The kind of man who builds a case the way I filled a prescription. Carefully. Accurately. Without shortcuts. Marcus found the property valuation. Someone had pulled a certified market analysis on the house on 22nd Avenue in October, not through a real estate agent, through a private valuation firm in Fremont, with a known relationship with Marsh and Duval in Pleasanton. The request had originated from an email address registered to a David Fenimore. David, my son-in-law. I sat with that specific piece for a long time. I thought about David at Christmas 3 years ago, carving the turkey at my table with that easy confidence of his. I thought about the way he always called me Gerald, never Dad, and how I had always privately respected that boundary. I thought about his business, a commercial real estate venture that had been struggling, Claire had mentioned, since the interest rate increases. She had mentioned it in passing, minimizing it, the way you mention something you are trying not to think about too hard. I thought about the gap between a struggling business and a $2.4 million house with no mortgage. Marcus told me about David the same evening he found the valuation. He set the document on the table between us and waited. He came to Claire, I said, not the other way around. That's my read, Marcus said. Claire loves you, Dad. I don't think she was the one who looked at this house and saw the solution first. That reframing did not make it better, but it made it true. And I have always needed things to be true, even when true is painful. The morning of February 8th, I called Claire and asked her to come over. I told her I needed to talk to someone about some paperwork from my financial advisor, that I was confused about some of it and could use her help making sense of it. I kept my voice slightly uncertain, slightly flat. The voice she had been listening to and documenting for the past 2 months. She said she'd be there by 2 o'clock. She asked if she should bring David. I said, if you think it would help. Marcus had left the house at 9 that morning. 2 stops, he said. He did not elaborate. I dressed carefully, pressed khakis. The blue Oxford shirt Carol always said brought out the gray in my hair. I stood in the bathroom mirror for a moment and looked at the face of a 67-year-old man who had spent 34 years knowing exactly what was in every bottle and had missed what was in his own. Then I straightened my collar and went downstairs to make coffee. Claire and David arrived at 1:58. She knocked before coming in, which she usually didn't do. I noticed that. The small adjustments people make when they're performing a version of themselves. Dad. She hugged me. You look tired. Are you sleeping okay? Better now, I said pleasantly. Come in. Coffee's on. We settled in the living room, the 3 of us. David sat on the couch with the carefully arranged ease of a man who had been thinking about what to do with his hands. Claire sat beside him, close. Both of them angled slightly toward me with the specific attentiveness of people who are monitoring something. So, Dad, Claire said, what did you need help with? I looked at my daughter, 39 years old, her mother's eyes, my stubbornness, which she'd inherited in full, though she had turned it in a direction I hadn't anticipated. She flagged some things, I said. My attorney. A small silence. Claire's expression held for exactly 1 beat longer than it should have before something moved behind it. David went very still. Your attorney? Claire said. Who? The doorbell rang. I watched my daughter's face as Marcus walked through the front door of the house on 22nd Avenue. I have seen a handful of things in 67 years that I will not forget. The morning Marcus took his first steps across this same living room floor. The look on Carol's face the day she got her diagnosis, before she rearranged herself into the version of herself that could carry it. A sunset over the Pacific from Baker Beach in September of 1987. This was one of them. Claire's expression did not collapse all at once. It left in pieces. First, her eyes changed. Then the careful warmth she'd been holding in her face lost its structure. Her mouth opened slightly and closed again. David, beside her, seemed to calcify, becoming very still in the specific way of a man deciding rapidly what not to say. Marcus walked in without hurrying. He came and stood beside me and looked at his sister across the room with an expression that was not angry. It was something quieter and more permanent than angry. "Claire," he said. "Just her name." "What is this?" she said. Her voice had gone thin. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "He's my son," I said, "and my attorney is with him, both of which have always been true." Marcus set his document bag on the coffee table. He opened it without rushing and placed 3 documents down, side by side, with the same precision he brought to everything. "The first document," he said, "is a certified laboratory analysis from the UCSF Pharmaceutical Sciences Department, confirming that the tablets in my father's current prescription bottle are not metoprolol. They are a sedative compound, correctly approximated in size and color, present in sufficient concentration to produce fatigue, slowed cognition, and memory lapses consistent with early neurological decline. The lab's written report classifies this as, and I am reading directly, pharmaceutical substitution consistent with deliberate and repeated administration." Lauren had pressed both hands flat against her knees. She was staring at the document and not at Marcus. "The second document is a preliminary conservatorship consultation record from Marsh and Duval in Pleasanton, along with a certified property valuation commissioned in October from a private firm in Fremont. The conservatorship inquiry originates from a Walnut Creek billing address. The valuation request originates from an email address registered to David Fenimore." David looked at the carpet. "The third document is a court-certified independent neurological evaluation conducted by Dr. Sandra Okafor of the Stanford Geriatric Neurology Department, dated January 31st, establishing my father's full cognitive competency across every assessed domain." Marcus looked up from the documents. His voice stayed level and clean. "So, to be precise about what happened, you replaced a 67-year-old man's heart medication with a sedative compound. You documented the resulting symptoms for 2 months. You retained a probate attorney who specializes in stripping elderly people of their legal rights. And you commissioned a private market valuation of his property, the house his wife planted flowers in front of, the house he has lived in for 33 years. He let that sit in the room. You didn't make a mistake. You made a plan, and so did we." Claire stood up. "Marcus." "Sit down, Claire." My voice, when it came out, was different. Not loud, different. The voice of someone who has made a decision that is very quiet and very final. She sat down. "I want a lawyer," David said. His voice was stripped of everything except that one sentence. "That is the correct instinct," Marcus said. "I strongly recommend it." He looked at me. I took out my phone and called Detective Lawrence Shue. He picked up on the first ring. "Mr. Whitmore," he said. "We're ready," I said. They arrived without sirens. 2 unmarked vehicles, 4 detectives, and the specific quiet authority of people who understand that understatement lands harder than spectacle. Detective Sue was a compact man in his late 40s, dark jacket, the unhurried manner of someone who had conducted enough of these to know that rushing it only cheapens it. He showed credentials at the door and walked into my living room like he had all the time in the world, because in this specific kind of case, he did. Claire started crying before Sue had finished the first sentence of the charges. Not the managed, composed emotion I had watched her produce at difficult moments over the years, her mother's funeral, the hard conversations. This was different. This was the sound a person makes when the structure they have been holding themselves inside collapses all at once, and there is nothing left underneath it. David said nothing. He looked at a spot on the wall behind Shue's left shoulder and kept his hands very still on his knees. I sat in the armchair across from them, and I watched. The pharmacist in me noted everything with the same quiet precision. He had spent 34 years applying to labels and dosages and interactions, and the 10,000 small details that determine whether something helps or hurts. When Shue reached for the handcuffs, Claire looked at me. "Dad," she said. Her voice broke completely in half on that single syllable. I do not know what made me ask it. I think perhaps I needed to hear it the way I needed to see the tablet under the kitchen light, not because I doubted what I already knew, but because I needed the specific detail to be real. "Why?" I said. The room was very still. She cried for a long moment. Then, quietly, almost to herself, David said, "We were going to lose everything. The business, the house in Walnut Creek, our credit, everything." And he said she stopped. He said, "What?" Marcus asked. From beside me. She looked at the floor. He said you were going to end up in a care facility anyway, that it was just a matter of time, that the house was sitting there, and we were drowning, and you were. She could not finish it. I was 70. I was alone. I was going to end up in a home anyway. That was the math they had done. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. Then I looked at my son-in-law, who was still studying the wall behind Shu's shoulder with the focused attention of a man who had run out of anything else to look at. "David," I said. He looked at me. First time since Marcus had walked through the door. "I have filled prescriptions for people for 34 years, I said. I have counseled families through some of the hardest moments of their lives. I have sat across that consultation window from people who were scared and confused and didn't understand what was happening to their bodies. And I will tell you something I learned in all of those years. Something that is as true as anything I know." I paused. When you start calculating what someone's life is worth to you in dollars, you have stopped seeing them as a person. And that moment, that specific moment, is the one you cannot come back from. I nodded at Detective Shu. "I'm done," I said. Claire and David were each charged with felony elder abuse, criminal conspiracy, and unlawful administration of a controlled substance under California Penal Code. Marsh and Duvall in Pleasanton was referred to the California State Bar for investigation of their role in facilitating the predatory scheme. The case went to preliminary hearing in the spring. I did not feel what I expected to feel walking out of that hearing. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think you deserve the honest version, not the clean one. You do not feel triumphant when your daughter is facing criminal charges. You feel the weight of every Sunday phone call, every dinner across the bay, every small moment you look back at now through a different lens and wish you had seen it differently. But underneath that weight, solid and permanent and load-bearing, there is something else. There is the specific clarity of a man who spent his career reading labels and has finally, completely, read the right one. That evening, Marcus and I drove out to Baker Beach. We parked and walked down to the water. The Golden Gate was enormous above us in the February dark, the bay black and cold, and moving the way the bay always moves without asking permission. We stood on that sand and did not say much, because we did not need to. He found a decent stone and skipped it. 3 skips. Then it went under. I found one and threw it straight in. I have never been able to skip stones. He laughed. Real, unguarded, my son's laugh. The one I hadn't heard properly in too long. "There is a place on Judah Street," I said, "that does a clam chowder that Carol used to make me drive out there specifically for. I haven't been back since she passed." He looked at me. "I think it's time," I said. He nodded once, slowly. "Lead the way," he said. We walked back up the sand to the car. The fog was coming in off the water, the same fog that comes every January and February and March, indifferent and clean and cold. I pulled my jacket closed and looked up at the bridge for a moment. 34 years of reading labels. One bottle I almost missed. Almost. I got in the car, started the engine, and drove my son to dinner.